Welcome to Millennial Z and Boomer X. I'm Boomer X.
And I am Millennial Z.
And today we are talking about the education system, being a student, and how it has changed over the years from when I started school in 1971, I believe. And yeah, long time ago. And you started school when?
Boy, how old am I?
You're supposed to
About
know.
about 24 years ago.
Right, right. Yeah, I started in kindergarten. Now they're starting school
1998,
kids.
1999, around there.
Right. Now they're starting kids in pre-K and even earlier than that, like 4 years old. I started when I was 5 years old, and I've seen earlier schools than that for 3-year-olds. Like
Yeah, they're
some of
trying to
them
pump them
aren't
in there
even.
as soon as possible.
Yeah, as soon as they can get them into the machine and make them models of human robots. I mean, contributing members of society.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, that's it's more. I'll say this: it is more obvious to me what education is for than
hmm
what it was in the past. In the past, it was to give, I thought, to give people base knowledge and understanding, up to high school, base knowledge and understanding so that you could function, that you had some critical thinking skills
Right.
and could view the world and consider different possibilities from different angles and also learn how to get along with people to some degree since you were with a bunch of others,
hmm
throughout the day.
Yeah, definitely
And also,
social
right,
maturity as well.
now it's to me it's all about conformity
hmm
and making sure that you do what you're told. That seems to be far more important than in the past. Now, don't get me wrong, it was important in the past too, because
Yeah.
now they can't kick you out really. They just send you to a lower quality school that's more
hmm
jail like. Back then, they would kick you out.
Yeah, there wasn't the No Kid Left Behind program, so
Yeah, well, that was a big excuse to just shove people through who really shouldn't
hmm
have graduated, I think. Um,
well, it was
but
a way for them to grant money for the school system because they were having kids not show up, so they couldn't get the grant money because the way that was
well,
processed was
it's
more
not up to
attendance
the
meant more
school to
money,
make sure the kids show up. That's the parents.
right?
And
So
I
they held
guess
parents accountable for it. That was the problem. That was with the
right.
program.
Well, they won't do it because politically speaking, they won't throw the people in jail or prison who won't
No.
send their kids to school. So that was a big wash. That was people
hmm
making up laws who really didn't understand the problem, but that's
Yeah.
not new.
Yeah. Right.
But I can remember going to kindergarten in the fifth grade and watching a moon landing on a black and white TV with the other kids in 1971. And my kindergarten teacher's name was Miss Champagne. And I thought she was 60 years old at the time. She might have been only 40, but I was five, so anybody over 30 was 60. Uh, and we did the usual kindergarten things, and I was fine going into the first grade, didn't have any issues. And we were there to learn how to function and learn knowledge. That we had to learn how to write, we had to learn how to add and subtract, we had to just basic things,
hmm
that and getting ready into the first grade. Now, of course, you had to at least know your colors before you got in there, and you had to
Oh,
be
so
able to
this,
count to
did you have
20.
to learn how to do cursive?
In the second grade, I had
So
to
they don't
learn
do
how to
that
do
anymore.
cursive. No, because
They
because
like they
y'all aren't
taught
going to
us.
use because y'all aren't going to use your fingers anymore, right? That's
I suppose so. They don't teach it
pens and
anymore.
pens and pencils are out of the question now, right? People
hmm
just kind of scrawl it with a notepad, or they think it with their mind and it pops up, or they use a keyboard. Nobody uses a pen, pencil, or anything like that.
Yeah, my girlfriend's nieces, they don't. One of them's
I've
11
heard
now.
that.
The other one's 5. They do not get cursive lessons.
That is pretty foolish on a number of levels. One thing it does,
I kind of see it.
it's not a waste of time because it doesn't take long. And
Except
one
that it's
thing
a
it,
waste of time, but it's also not very applicable in most life now. So,
well, it's not applicable right now, but it may be soon. And it's applicable for some people. It's just they can get around it.
hmm
But I really see it as being an important skill for a number. Not just that you can write in cursive, just that you sat down and learned how to control your mind and your person and your hand enough to write in a particular way. It only takes about one grade and you're doing it.
Yeah.
Second grade, I learned how to write in cursive.
They could spend that time teaching them another language, but actually efficiently teaching them another language instead of what I got when I was
How
going through
about just
elementary
teaching
school.
them the one you're speaking better? That'd be
That
cool.
that as well. They don't do that efficiently
Cursive
at
would be a
all.
nice way to do that, I think, and make them write it down. But they can't even take notes in an efficient fashion if you're not writing. Like I could write cursive and it would look like Greek to them,
Probably.
which is absurd to me. But I get it. I get it to some degree. They want to teach them different things, like how not to do things that are meaningful. I guess
Hmm.
I'm really banging on the current education model because it's only proved to deserve it over the last 20 years or so, in my mind. Thankfully, certain things will never change. Like logic is logic, although you can try to recreate it and rename it. Everybody knows
I don't
if
know
you're going
about
to
that
say
one.
something absurd, yeah, you don't know that everybody's going to laugh you out of the room and you have to prove yourself. So you can rename it anything you want. The Orwellian uh, speak is in full
Double
throttle
speak.
right now. Yeah, double
Yeah.
speak and other poly speak and other types of nonsense are in full regale right now. And
Yeah.
it's obvious to anyone. I mean, if you have someone who's never been exposed to it and you have to explain to somebody for an hour how something that is clearly bad is not really bad, then you know what you're engaging in is doublespeak. It's nonsense.
Right.
If you can't just simply no, you misunderstand. It's not what it looks like. It's really this, and they go, oh, okay, then that's fine. But if you have to convince them that what is actually happening is actually good for you, like, oh no, 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 we have to do this for your betterment. Like,
Hmm.
no, no. If you have to almost torture them to get them to think your way, that's not they're either insane or you're doing nonsense. You're doing something that you shouldn't be doing. But you've been brainwashed too, so you don't know any better.
Unfortunately, I had to relearn a lot of things after getting out of school, the school system. I definitely, well, not too much relearning, but I was aware of it at the time, but I didn't really realize how much of it was set in stone around you the entire time, how much you were constantly exposed to that type of thought process.
Like what?
Well, I know for sure the biggest one was they acted like homework and doing certain things in a certain way. And I understand they're trying to bring discipline into you
Sure.
to a certain extent, but
Because
like
most
you're
people lack exactly that. Like
sure.
you'll see most of the people who are in colleges and universities lean liberal, and it's not because they're so educated. It's because they want free stuff
Mhm.
and they want things to be easy for them. And that's every youth group, young adults and teens ever, because they're still children. And it's been that way for them their whole life. And they're wondering why it's not that way anymore. And they're scared and they're shocked by it and they think it's unfair. Well, now they have a longer childish lifespan. So they're older and they still think that way.
Mhm.
And it just was not that way. It was harsher when I was younger, but it made you face reality sooner. And it, I would say it's probably a little psychologically damaging because you were more on your own. We had more free playtime. Parents did not hover over you, and neither
Right.
did teachers. There were a lot more quote unquote fights, fist fights, physical altercations when I was a kid that were handled amongst the kids very quickly. And teachers did not swoop in unless somebody was hurt. They would
They
let the
don't
kids
swoop in at
tussle it
all
out.
anymore. It's a
Oh, they
zero
got
touch
cops there
all.
now. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy. I mean, a
Mhm.
simple childish fight is now a criminal act, which blows my mind.
Yeah. That's that's 100% what's happening.
Yeah,
But
that's blowing things out of proportion, I would say. Kids, that's what kids are going to school to learn how to be. It's not supposed to be a final judgment upon them.
mhm. Yeah, it's getting pretty ridiculous on the fighting scene. But I was really more towards like when I was growing up, I know a lot of it changes depending on your state and how their school system is, but uniforms were a very big deal. and they constantly were about tucking in your shirt and having your ID out and having
Yeah,
your
that's
uniform a
more of the
certain way at all
conformity.
times. Right.
Right. We could wear pretty much what we wanted as long as it didn't. We couldn't wear shorts ever. That was one thing. They couldn't wear shorts because there was no worried about, exposing skin for the girls where y'all could. I remember having to buy uniform shorts for y'all, but we we could wear blue jeans, which was a big deal because in the 50s and 60s you couldn't wear blue jeans. They called them dungarees in the South. Wouldn't let you wear them, and they just started letting you grow your hair out when I started going to junior high school. Before then, they'd make you cut it if it got too long. Where like now they'll let you color it anything you want, but you have
Oh
to be in
yeah.
but you
That
have to
was
be in uniform, which is
while I was
crazy.
growing up, that was being fought against. The coloring of the hair was
Right,
definitely being fought against.
right. Well, it
A
was
lot of a lot of the girls were dyeing their hair red, and they're like, "No, you can't do that." Stuff like
right.
that.
And we live in the conservative South, so it's probably different in different parts of the United States and certainly different parts of the world. They don't care as long as you show up and you don't cause a problem. They don't care what
Hmm.
your hair looks like. But for us, that was certainly a thing. We didn't have to have uniforms, but we did have to make sure our clothes were, you know, clean and covered us up. That was pretty
Right.
much it. And they were happy with that. Like I said, unless you were a problem to teachers and other students, they basically left you alone. If you were failing, they would call your parents after they talked to you themselves a couple of times. They didn't do it immediately. They
Yeah.
allowed you a little rope to hang yourself and say, "Look, I've tried to talk to him. He just won't do it. I'm calling you now." And that was it. Now it's not like that at all. It's simply
No,
they just they
they
are
don't even.
everybody's hovering everywhere for any little thing. Any little thing is a major deal now, which leads me to
It
believe that
depends on the teacher, and it's weird because in a lot of aspects, people think that's a better way of teaching is to constantly hover over them. I don't think it
I
is,
don't agree.
but I
I
also
don't
don't
agree at
agree
all.
with the
Some
complete
students may need it.
disassociation with them that a lot of teachers take on as well. They don't even care anymore. They just go through the motion of
Hmm.
because they're there just simply to get a check, and everybody knows it as soon as they walk in
They've
the
been beaten
class the first
down,
time.
right, and jaded and beaten down, and they're just tired, and they can't win, so they've stopped fighting.
Hmm.
I understand their thought process. Not that I agree, but I understand it. I'll bet you they have fought that fight many, many times and realized they cannot win. They can't get through. So they just throw up their hands and do their job, just what they need to do to follow the school curriculum and end the day. And I'll say this again, when I was a kid, teachers had a lot more leeway in what and how to teach than they
Hmm.
do now. Now, every day is dictated to them what they have to do. And if they fall behind, they have to have an
Yeah, the
explanation
curriculum is
for
very
it.
strict.
And in the past, that wasn't so. And our kids were learning better in
Hmm.
the past when they didn't have that rigid structure. I think it's because most of the people who created that were PhDs who never taught kids anything. They just thought it would be better because their
Right.
dissertation argued that it would. And other people nodded sagely who never taught kids and agreed because
Hmm.
they're in charge. So
Hmm.
this is what we have, an education set up by people who never taught anybody. And
Hmm.
that's why we have so many problems. More kids going to school, more control, and less kids learning.
It's more control in certain aspects, but a lot less control in others. Because I know
More
uh,
of the
we,
curriculum.
of the curriculum, but teachers, when I was in kindergarten, were still able to like swat us with a yardstick. That is
Really?
not even close to allowed
Yeah,
now.
we had more than that. We had paddles. I mean,
Hmm.
you'd bend over the desk in front of the kids in class. I mean, that would be
Right.
absolutely verboten now. And yeah, it was
And
right there.
and she probably wasn't really allowed to do it, but she was an old black lady, one of my kindergarten teachers, and she
Right. She was
wouldn't
old
hit anybody.
school.
She was
Yeah.
old school, old school. She was already probably already in her 60s when, and so she's
Yeah.
already dealt with kids her
That was a
entire career.
that was a
So
common thing when I was a kid. I mean,
yeah,
they
and
had
she
several.
swatted us on the hand with it, and of course the
Yeah.
kid would freak out, but she
Right.
wasn't really ever
She
doing
didn't
anything
cause any
crazy.
harm. Probably didn't,
No.
not even a
At
pink
most, she would
mark.
yell a lot and then try to get him to calm down. She would like
Right.
yell to scare him a little bit, like, "Hey,
Yeah.
shut up and listen," type of
Right.
situation.
Right.
I do remember her slamming the yardstick on the table once and breaking it in half, trying to get us like we
Get
were
your
just
attention.
all,
How
yeah, we
old were
were
you
all.
then?
4 or 5.
Oh, that was kindergarten.
Yeah, yeah, it was kindergarten teacher.
Y'all must have been monsters. Or she
Oh,
did.
we were awful. Yeah, we
Yeah,
were awful. We were
yeah.
kindergarten kids. I mean,
Y'all
you
were
got 30
y'all were
kids.
and I have to say, kids, I was never a teacher. I couldn't do it. I don't have the temperament nor the desire for it. And I'll say this, anybody who has been teaching more than 2 years is a freaking saint. They are not doing it. They are not doing it for money. They are not doing it for anything other than the fact that they want to teach your kids and make a difference. And that is all. And it is so hard for them to do that with all the rules they have to do and all the paperwork they have to do that is not related to teaching, all the administrative nonsense to justify their position in existence. So anybody who stuck it out for over 2 years and is still teaching is a freaking saint. And that's just me saying that. But
I wholeheartedly disagree, but
you
okay.
disagree?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sure you met some bad teachers, and I have
I've
too
met
when
a
I was a
lot of
kid.
bad teachers. Met a lot more worse teachers than good teachers. I had in my
Really.
entire school
I thought
time
that's the thing.
2 to 3 good teachers.
Really, I had the opposite. When I was coming up, most of the teachers were good, and that's probably what colors my view. Most of the teachers were good. We had a handful in my life that were absolutely bad and should not have been there. Not only were they bad, they were dumb. They didn't have the attitude nor the aptitude,
Hmm.
and but they wanted to be there because I think that was the only time they could get people to listen to them. So they should have absolutely, and that's only because the kids that were there basically hostage. And the other teachers took up for them because they didn't know anything. They just knew them as other people. We knew them as teachers, and they were absolutely incompetent. They could barely speak. They certainly didn't. If the book wouldn't have been there giving them the answers, they wouldn't have known them, any of them.
I do believe there's a lot of good intentioned people that come into teaching for the benefit of teaching and trying to change the next generation and trying to make
Mm-hmm.
them and sculpt them into better people and potential great beings.
Mm-hmm.
But I also highly, deeply believe the old saying of those who cannot do teach.
Right. Well, it's hard for me to argue that looking now because I've had to meet with some of your teachers in the past, and I didn't know them all. Met a couple and they seemed okay. What would I expect? And I did meet a couple and I was thinking, what are they doing here? Because
Hmm.
clearly they're not the kind of person you want to be as a teacher. Or perhaps they were just passing time until they were getting a better deal. Or who knows? They enjoyed the 6 to 8 hour work days and only 181 working days a year. And then
Yeah.
they were off for all those vacation days and retirement and benefits. Um, they complain about their pay, but really compared to everybody else, they don't work many hours.
Well, I will give a little bit of a caveat here. I am well aware that I'm speaking on the experience of
That's dude,
Louisiana's education system,
it's
and it's
no
probably
different anywhere else.
it is. It is.
It's not that much different. Teachers are
We are
teachers.
the one of the worst ones
It,
of the entire state or
may,
nation, United States of the nation.
no, and I'll tell you now, all this stuff is federally mandated, what they have to teach, how they have to teach it, and all that. It really isn't. We have a different culture here than other places, but they're all a little different. But we're all humans. We're all dealing with the same BS, all trying to make our way, and we all come to the same similar conclusions
Well,
under the same culture,
to, I'll into the
nationwide.
extent that it's based off of the property. The pay of the teacher is based off of the property of the area for the school and how much they get granted and all that. Well, Louisiana is inherently going to have a lower pay rate because a
But
pay
they know
rate
that
because
when they
of
come
that.
here, and
Well,
also the cost of living is much lower, so it evens out. It
kind of,
really
but
evens out.
what I'm trying to get with that is that it influences a certain type of person to be committed to that. Is you have your good intentioned people and then you have
Yeah, the
your
ones I call
mediocre
saints.
people,
Right.
right?
Well, you're
And then
always
you
gonna. Most people are gonna be mediocre. That's the definition of mediocre, and
right.
they're fine. Even the mediocre people are fine. What I have a problem with, and this goes into any profession, that the good and the mediocre don't drive the bad out. That
Right.
goes for police, attorneys, politicians, physicians, anybody that has authority over other people. You're not a
Doctors.
good person if you know somebody's doing bad and you don't do something about it. You lost your good person status. And I don't care what you do. So
Yeah.
when they say, oh, they're good ones, not if those good ones knew about the bad ones and didn't do anything about it. You have just dropped to mediocre status at best.
Right.
And that's anything. I'm not
Yeah.
saying you're bad, but you're not good anymore. You're
Right.
just mediocre because you won't drive these people out. And every profession has it. And honestly, that's what makes the good people good. They just want to get along and do what good they can, and they don't want to say bad things about bad people because it's bad things. Like, oh, they had an off day. You don't have an off day 50 times in a year. You don't, or 5 times in a year, you know,
Right.
and that's only the ones you know about. Unless you're watching them 24/7, then of course you're going to see more than five things in any given, short period because you're there all the time. Everybody makes mistakes all the time, but they're nothing harmless mistakes. They're not bad decisions consistently over time. And and that's another thing the education system I've noticed has changed. It used to encourage, when I was a kid, it used to encourage risk taking and exploring things and doing new things. Now I see
No.
what it does encourage not making a mistake and doing well. The exact opposite. And that really bothers me.
Yeah.
You have, the people who have done great things in this country had to drop out of school to get it done because the conformist school system simply wouldn't allow it.
Right.
They couldn't think it anymore. That has changed quite a bit, and that means that the politics and the society has changed to such a degree that it's discouraging free thought. That's
Mm.
not cool. When I
It's
was a
definitely
kid,
discouraging free thought.
yeah, it was the exact opposite. They wanted people coming up with new ideas, doing new things, exploring things, and failing. Failing just means that thing didn't work out. You can always do more. You're still alive. A failure is going to happen. The only way you can't fail is if you don't do things.
One of my biggest peeves to this day about it, and how do you remember how your grading system was? Did they mostly, was
Oh,
it
yeah.
mostly bent towards test taking, or was it bent towards homework or
It was
social
mostly
groups
for
or social
test taking.
projects?
Homework was only a small portion of the grade. There were quite, because I never did homework
I've
when I
had
was in class.
classes, no lie, 80% of the grade was homework.
You know what that's for? The
The
dumb
common
kids.
denominator. Yeah, that's
That's for
the
the dumb
lowest
kids.
denominator, I
Yeah,
should say.
you're making sure that your dumb kids pass because you can just do the work. Even though it's bad work, you've done the work, and that's going to count for 80% of your grade. And if you fail the test, meaning you can't understand it or you don't understand it, meaning I failed as a teacher to get you understand what this course is about, you're
Hmm.
still going to get out of my class and I'm going to look good. And
Hmm.
that is terrible. It was the exact opposite when I was going to school. Some of them didn't even count it at all, homework at
Essentially,
all.
you're getting a participation award is what that
Right.
is. When
You
80%
show
of it's
up,
homework, you
that
just did the
started,
work. You
right.
just
Yeah.
filled some papers in at the end of the day every day. Good job.
That's forced on by our federal system. I promise you. That is something that's that no kid left behind, meaning every kid's going to graduate whether he knows anything or not. That's
Hmm.
that's basically what it. I tell you what, another thing that I couldn't stand, I saw in the 90s when you were a little kid, just going to school, elementary school, early elementary, zero tolerance. That
Yeah,
drives me crazy. And all that means is I don't have the ability to discern right from wrong. And I'm going to make everybody suffer. And
hmm,
good or bad, right and wrong don't mean anything. Facts are meaningless. All I know is I heard this happen, so I'm punishing everybody, and
right.
I shouldn't be hearing this. That's what that means, and that is a lazy administrator.
Yeah,
Whoever institutes zero tolerance is a lazy and foolish administrator and perpetuates bad authority.
yeah. To me, it's essentially the same line. Zero tolerance to me shows me that you don't actually care about getting involved. So you're
No,
just going to
yeah,
deem whatever
facts are meaningless.
whoever is involved is everybody's getting it.
Yeah,
Doesn't
and
matter.
politics is more important than what actually happened. That's what zero tolerance means to me. And it also
Hmm.
shows you have lost your way as a
Right.
as a as a teacher or somebody in a position of authority. Whenever I hear somebody in a position of authority say zero tolerance anything, I know they're idiots and I'm no longer listening to them. That's
Only Sith and work in absolutes.
yes, and that is
That's
an
an absolute.
absolute saying. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a nice irony that the Jedi put out.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's what I'm saying. If I see somebody, I have zero tolerance for that. There's very few things. There's always an exception. But I mean, when we're talking about in a contextual thing, we're talking about a school setting. If you have a zero tolerance policy for anything except school shootings, okay, I can see zero tolerance for that. But that's obvious. I mean, things like somebody saying a bad word. I had zero tolerance for that word in my class. What?
Or a fist fight or something
Yeah,
happens
yeah,
and you
yeah.
don't
You're
care
gonna,
who started it, you don't care
yeah.
what
You don't
happened
care.
before, you
That
don't care
kid
about the
might have been
context, you don't care if they've been bullied forever,
right.
you
That
know.
kid might have been bullied by that other kid for 3 months, but your head was so far up your behind, and you were
Mhm.
so worried about being in the teacher's lounge and getting out of that class that you didn't notice it, and neither did any of the other teachers. And the kid finally got tired of it and beat the other kid down, but zero tolerance. You're going to get rid of everybody. Well, that wasn't the proper way to handle it. What do you mean? The kid went to you 5 times and you ignored him, or you said, "Don't worry about it," or "Just come see me," and nothing happened. Everything was done. So zero tolerance means you failed. Whenever you have to institute a zero tolerance policy, you failed.
Right.
And that's what I'm talking about. Whenever they say that, I don't listen to them anymore because I know they have nothing to offer. They can't think, they can't critically think. They're worried about politics more than they're worried about facts and evidence. And I don't want to know them. There's nothing they can tell me that's going to make any difference to me.
Yeah, it'd be hard pressed for them to find any reasonable, rational system to justify a zero tolerance program to me.
There
I can't
wasn't.
think of any
There was
angle.
there was no such thing as zero tolerance, like I said, until the 90s, and that was done to try to take liability off of those administrators.
Right.
And all they did was create a worse problem because
Mhm.
people who are real bullies don't care about consequences. That's why they're bullies. So now they get to go down in flames with their target. What's better than that? We both get suspended and have to deal with people where before it was just me. I can
Mhm.
punch you in the head and you get suspended. That's a win-win in my book because before it was just be me getting suspended.
So let me ask this on you: on when you're in high school and so on,
Yeah, high
how
school.
often was woodworking and like essentially vocational school teaching? How abundant was
I'll
that?
say this: it started in junior high school. I graduated high school in 1984, and it started in junior high school in 1977 for me. So, or 1976. No, it's 19 junior high schools. I take that back. 78. I went back too far. And when we were in seventh grade, seventh, eighth, and ninth at junior high school. In seventh grade, you had a choice. You could go to home economics or agriculture studies and shop, agriculture and shop studies. Now, this was a small rural junior high school, which was the same as every other rural junior high school in the parish slash county. So they were no different. And talking to other people growing up all over the state and even in other neighboring states with counties, it was all very similar. And in high schools and junior high schools that were in cities, it wasn't really any different. So the same thing. And all the boys, almost all the boys, went to agriculture and shop classes, and all the girls went to home ec classes. Now, we did have a couple of girls go to agriculture and shop classes, and they weren't lesbians, and nobody thought they were. They were just girls that were just, they were doing home ec at home with their moms, and they didn't want to have to deal with it again at school, and they thought what the boys were doing was cool, or at least they got to hang out with boys because they were learning how to be, they were growing up. There were a couple of guys who went, you know what? I have no interest in farming, raising pigs, learning how to weld, learning how to cut wood. I'll go to home ec. I'm fine. I need to learn
Right.
how to cook for myself anyway. And they weren't homosexuals. Now they would catch a little bit of ragging, from
Oh,
from the guy
why did you have to preface
because everybody
that?
thought when I was a kid, if you did that, oh man, that guy must be gay. They weren't gay. Well, one guy was, but that was we we didn't find that out till later. But honestly,
I
I
would
think it was
assume they immediately went there because they didn't feel like working, or they didn't
they
really
didn't
want to do
they
anything.
didn't want to do that stuff, and that's fine. And I never thought anything one way or the other. And one guy I thought was a genius. I was just too slow. He's like, I went to home ec. I'm like, why is
All the
that,
girls
man?
are there.
Yes, all the girls are there. I was like, you, sir, are a damn genius. And he just started laughing. He goes, yep. Now in the high school, it split up more. Junior high was very limited because they had fewer students and less budget. But in high school, they consolidated all the junior high school kids, and they went to high school from all over the Western Parish, the Northwestern Parish. So they had a shop class that was separate from an agriculture class that was separate from, you know, other classes that were more specific in their work. And the shop was woodworking or car mechanics, or, they broke it down a little bit more, different classes you could take. Industrial arts was another one. I was in college prep classes. I was taking calc and trig and all that. And I did all that stuff in my spare time, which they were doing in class. Of course, they were too. Like
Yeah.
me and my friends were fixing up cars to race on the streets. So we were doing shop class, but we were doing that for fun while we were learning in trigonometry and calculus as seniors in high school, or
Right.
geometry as a junior, all that stuff. And the kids that were doing the same thing, they were just getting A's for doing what they wanted to do anyway. They bring their own cars in and work on them. Well, we had to do it after school. And I couldn't do it after school because I was working to try to earn money, to
Right.
save up for a car. But they would, they were actually smarter. But I wanted it to learn to go to university and do other things. They had no intention of going to college or university. So that was fine. It was just keeping them in school and being productive.
Yeah, I know this is conditional on where your high school was, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm quite sure most high schools are this way now, is they don't have workshop, they don't have welding
Yeah,
class, they don't
they
have
expect everybody to go to university, which is a
they yeah,
mistake.
it's heavily bent towards university,
Because
heavily
while I
bent
was
towards
there, I
university.
hated it. It was boring. Most of what they taught was a rehash of what we learned in high school for the first 2 years,
Right.
but at a much faster pace. But
Hmm.
you still had it, and even though I clept out, which is jumping ahead to advanced class, I skipped out of my freshman and year completely, and halfway through my sophomore year with early testing, and
Hmm.
they just gave me credit. But the thing is, it is a problem because many people don't need to go to university. All it is a money suck, and
Yeah.
keeping kids in more of an educational conformity industrial complex thing, and paying money to people who don't need that money, take out loans for it. You don't need a university degree to be a plumber,
Right.
to be a carpenter, to be a welder, to do
Electrician.
scuba diving, electrician. You don't need it. Why aren't you learning how to be those things during that time period, as opposed to, well, you'll have a more comprehensive background and be able to speak to people at their own level. And what level is that, you little snot-nosed elitist? It means to them exactly what it should mean to them. You don't need to be thinking you're better than somebody simply because you went to a university for 4 years. It typically means you would have more knowledge of art history, geography, better
Yeah,
critical
it's a
thinking
higher
skills.
education was
Right,
what it
better
used to
critical
be.
thinking skills, better vocabulary, better way to frame papers, be more prodigious when you're actually writing and more cohesive, and better research skills. But that is not the case anymore. I've had
Well, most
people.
people now go there just specifically for a career. So they're not even going there for a really higher education. They're only getting there for a piece of paper that allows them for a career
Right, because
they intend to have.
there has certainly been degree inflation, and often what I see, they're teaching at university level what they used to teach at high school level when I was there.
Yeah.
And like I said, it was a repeat, but no, this is the class. This is 300 level classes. And I know some people are going to tell me wrong, and I'm telling you, you don't know what you're talking about. I've seen the textbooks. I
Yeah.
was reading textbooks at 300 level in a university that was junior or senior level of my high school curriculum. And
Oh,
it
they do that
was,
now. It's still the same rehash. When I went to tech school for radiology
yeah.
technician, only one
And they
semester
just want to
there,
make sure you
it was the
understand it,
same
the
thing.
fundamentals, and that's fine. I'm talking about more advanced concepts, and they're not in any greater detail. They
Hmm.
expect you to do the work and do that, and you're really just memorizing and regurgitating what the textbook tells you
Right.
in a way that they believe is comprehensive and understandable, and show that you're adept with that knowledge and can reframe it. That's all that is. You should be learning how to evaluate and perceive totally differently and think in a way that's more elastic. That's really what university is to me. But that's not the case I see. Now they're cranking out drones.
Right.
Unless you get to master's and PhD level, then you have research and more theoretical things that you're probing out. But I mean, at the bachelor's level, I haven't seen much that impresses me at all. And it could be because I'm older, more experienced and educated now. But I'm trying to think about it from that standpoint. that it is quite interesting. And I'm not denigrating education. I just think that it is backslid. I think education's a wonderful thing, and everybody should have as much as they want and get as much as they want. But it has certainly changed over the years.
I think education is the definition of it has changed for us in a Western society compared to what it used to mean. Because now, when I hear education, especially in the format of university or high schools or such, it's memorization then regurgitation. What that really
Right.
means.
We have
It's
computers for
not
that. We have
right.
Google now. I mean, I grew up when there were no computers. I remember the first computer I ever saw was in a computer lab in high school as a junior. And it
Yeah.
was a TRS Radio Shack TRS 80. And I was learning how to program in BASIC, and I could do it.
One of the things that bothered me the most was when I was taking the ACT and the science part was had insane time spots. It was like you have 10 minutes to read this paragraph and figure out what they're trying to talk about and figure out what this graph is. And I'm like,
Right.
what is this getting at? What skill are you
Oh,
trying to get
that's
at
a
here?
whole different thing. What they want to do is see how intellectually quick and perceptive you are and how you process information and how you can apply it. So that's for the people because and I blame the educators themselves for this. They've always had time slots for tests, always. And part of it is how quickly can this guy work? Because a quick intellect is indicative of somebody who's smart. Because you can have many people can get through problems, but it takes them forever. They have to walk
Sure.
around it, cogitate forever, think about it, try everything, and then come up with the answer. But a really smart guy, he can do it all in his mind and it's working fast. And he can have the answer and go through all those steps in 1/10 to 1/100th the time. And that's what they're looking for.
Sure, but
So
there's also some
that's the
type
way
of
to do that.
unfamiliarity that has to be associated with this when nobody is tested for this or even studied for
No,
this.
what they want to do is find out where
Like,
you
what are
are.
we even talking about here?
No, what they want to do is find. That's all it is. That's what the test is for. That's all that. That's an evaluation. That's not a test like a high school typically gives you, unless it's for an overall evaluation
Hmm.
of an intellectual capacity, and that's all that is. Like your SATs or your ACTs or anything, ASVAB, anything like that, and they're all timed for that because a lot of people can seem smart and get the right answer if they got all day.
But it's a trick of method to that extent because then you find
Not
out
a
this is
trick.
what they're doing. Yeah, it is because then you find out what they're doing,
No,
you find out the formula to which they're doing it, and then you
no,
find out the method in which it's the most
no,
efficient, and then
no,
anybody can do it.
no,
Yes, yes, yes.
no,
That's literally what ACT test books are for. That's
no.
literally what they practice you to do.
Nope.
Okay.
Because you think that because you don't understand what they're really showing. When they put in those time constraints, it does not matter how much you've studied when they make you read a paragraph, comprehend it, pull it out, and give the right answer. You can't
It's a
study
method of
enough.
process. It's a method of process.
You
And if
can
you're
get
familiar with the method of
faster.
process, you can do it faster.
No,
That's all it is.
yes, but that's not what I'm saying. But the difference to degree and faster isn't much. And that's
It
why they
is.
do it the way they do it. It isn't. Because you have people who have taken the ACT, gone to class, done all these things, and you know how much they increase their score? 1 or 2 points at best. And this is the second or third time they're
Sure.
taking it with tutoring. That's nothing.
Sure,
That
you have people like that, but that's the outlier. You're talking about
no,
outliers.
that's the
That's not the
average.
average. That's
Yep.
not the average.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the average.
That's what
That's
I've
not the
seen.
average. If that was the average, they wouldn't even bother with it. Nobody would pay for it if that was the average. Doesn't make any
That's
sense.
because they don't know any better. It's their kid. People are willing to throw anything at their kids. Your kid is not going to get that much smarter in a year. They don't know
Sure, but
that.
it's not about it's that's what I'm getting at. The ACT, SAT, and ACT are not about intelligence as much as you think they are. They are not. It's
It
about a
measure.
formula and how you do it.
They want to
If
know
you
how much
practice this method and you get good at doing this method and formula, you score higher. That's all there is to it.
for
Now there
certain
is some
things. For certain
some like
things,
there is some critical thinking measures in the math parts or formulas and they put it to a certain extent, but the test taking situation of itself is how good are you at taking a test. That is the ACT and SAT. It is not about intellect, I promise you. I don't
no,
know why
that's a
you think
large
otherwise.
factor. No, that's a large factor, but it's not all of it.
I
And that's what I was
promise you
trying to tell you.
it is that.
No,
Everybody who starts studying the ACT and SAT, they start realizing this very quickly. It is about how you take the test. It is about how good you are at taking tests. It is not about the
Of
content
course.
of the test.
That's always, I mean, it's about, I don't want to argue because now we're arguing about something to, that is fundamental to test taking. That is a non-issue to me. That's not what I'm talking about. And that's when I
Well,
say
that's
no.
it's part of the
Of
education system
course,
because you're
if you
getting good at
can't,
taking tests
if you can't
instead of
read
learning the content.
or take tests, you're not going to do well taking tests. That's a fundamental thing. So
But
that's like
taking tests
saying,
isn't indicative of being good at life and doing things and being
no,
smart.
but this is a test to determine how well you're going to do in school. And a lot of doing in school is knowing how to read, comprehend, and give the right answer. And that's what I'm talking about. And then we're talking specifically about ACT and SAT. So we're not talking about the education as a
Sure.
whole, but you're arguing about something different than what I'm arguing about. And you think I'm arguing about the same thing, and we're not. That's like you saying, no, running's about learning how to run fast. And if you can run fast, then you're a fast runner. And I'm saying, well, no kidding.
No, that's
But
not
you
what I'm saying.
first have to learn how to walk. So,
That's
or the
not what I'm saying.
opposite. Yeah, but it's a similar analogy. Of course, being good at test taking is endemic to taking a test. That is a non-starter, and that's what I'm talking about here. However, the way they frame those, if you're not good at taking tests, no matter how smart you are, you're not going to do well. I agree, if that's what you're trying to say. I agree. You cannot be good at taking tests, and you can be smart, and you can crash and burn in an ACT or SAT setting. However, I also tell you, you will not do well in an educational setting, and that's also what it's testing out.
You will not do well in this educational setting. Is
Right.
why I was trying.
Right.
Is why
And
I was getting to all of this. The education
right.
system's bent
Right.
towards a very specific way of learning,
Right.
which I disagree with.
But that's the way it's been since time immemorial in the modern, since World War II. Let's say that way. That's the way it's been essentially since they created school factories to crank out people who can work in modern society in groups to do things. Yes, so they created that series of tests that way to see how well you're going to do in higher education.
Sure.
Yes.
I'm getting to, and yes, there are like extremes to where people have, dyslexia or something of the matter, and they're never going to be good at taking tests. Doesn't mean they're not intelligent. It just means they're bad at taking tests. But I'm even getting to the point of the details of not even an SAT or ACT situation of there is a formula on how they prepare these questions and how they put the choices
Sure.
of multiple choice answers.
That's every test.
They have a formula on how they make a comprehension on how this looks.
There are algorithms
and that formula can be
for
cracked,
everything.
and that formula is a method of process. And what I'm saying is when you get good at determining that method and that formula means you're good at taking that test, but it doesn't mean you're intelligent. Just because somebody makes a high score in ACT, I've met people who make very good scores in ACT, and they are not intelligent people. They just studied really hard at taking the SAT and ACT. That's all there is to it. That's what I'm getting at.
I'm not arguing that, but I'm telling you, they are such outliers, it's meaningless.
I don't think they're outliers. I think if more people worked hard enough at getting good at understanding the formula, that sure, they're an outlier in that they work hard to get it
right.
To get good.
That's my point.
I'll get good. I'll give them that. There's definitely credit where credit's due on they definitely did due diligence and they studied their butts off.
And I'll tell you this,
and did a good job, but
it's irrelevant, and that's what I was trying to tell you. It doesn't matter. Why? Because if they approach their education the same way, they'll do well.
Sure.
And that's all the test is testing, and that's what I'm telling you. It doesn't matter.
The key element of that was that you're saying it's indicative of intelligence when they can do this, but it's not. That's what I'm saying.
For the vast majority, and here's the other thing: no test is perfect. And every test can be gamed, and everything is an algorithm. Computers are proving that right now, and so is AI. Everything. Sure. And sure, those tests follow some intrinsic algorithm and formula, as you put it, by the way it's set up and introduced. But the thing is, if they understand that and they apply themselves and do it, they are outliers. Most of them don't. They get what people get what they get. That is 99% of the people who take it. So for that 1% who gain it and they come out with higher test scores than what you know that they deserve, good for them. It doesn't matter. The vast majority of people are simply, it's measuring how quickly they can think and how quickly they can comprehend and answer the question. For most people, that's what it does. And that's what it's intended to do. You will always have people find cracks and look for little chinks in the armor and come up with ways to try to beat the system, whatever the system is. Okay, but it doesn't really change the fact that what those tests do for the great majority of people. And that's what it's for.
Sure. I think we're going into extremes, but I'm trying to get into an
Yeah,
average.
you
There's an
starting to go in
average.
extremes to prove your point, then it's not really proving your point other than it's an extreme. I'm
No, I'm
talking
trying
in
to say
generalities.
you're saying there's outliers here, and I don't think it's a 1%. I'm genuinely, there's a reason why everybody who's anybody and trying to do better in SAT and ACT, and they go into studying the SAT and ACT, they will do better in the SAT and
Yeah,
ACT
they generally do. And
because they learn the method of it.
yeah, and it's usually if they have a good tutor, and it's usually 2 or 3 points at the most, which is almost nothing. Most of the
Now,
time, it's 1 or 2 points, and a couple of times I've seen it actually drop because they got so nervous with all that pressure. But that has nothing to do with the method. That's more the person.
sure, yeah,
Right.
there's those as well, but there's definitely I think there's an increase if somebody actually learns how it's done. They
Sure, they can improve it, and you know
they can
what? Good
definitely improve
for
it
them.
drastically.
Not that
And that
much.
does to me that is not indicative of somebody intelligence. That's indicative of somebody who
Well, here's the
learned how
thing.
to
Here's the
take a
thing.
test.
Most of that
Okay.
test, and you might have reinterpreted what I said, and we got in that argument on something that's really not an argument. Most of that test is not about how smart you are. Those certain parts that have time studies for comprehension and certain answers, that helps measure your intelligence. What that test really does, it wants to know how educated you are.
Right.
That's
And
all.
that's the problem. That's what I'm getting at with the time test system of the science part. It's like you're not actually seeing
You
how
either know
educated
it,
I am
yeah,
because you're seeing how what process I do to find the answer you want me to find when
right,
I've never studied for this situation.
right,
Makes no sense to me.
and you may not. And some of them, they know you haven't studied. They want to know
And
if
I
you
scored
studied.
well on it, but I was just I was just this is so absurd to me. Why are you making
They
me
did
take the
that on
test like
every
this?
test, but I find it funny that you're so bothered by it. But
It made
they do
zero
that.
sense.
They do that to see how far you've gone. Because if you've gone over the norm, then you scored well. And they how quickly you arrive at it means how much have you worked here, or did you have to figure it out on your own with some other stuff? It measures a whole bunch of things you obviously don't understand, is what I'm saying. And I'm trying not to be a condescending butthole when I say that, but that's really what it's
I
doing.
think
And it
it's
bothers
measuring
you.
things that aren't applicable to anything that's worth anything to me
Yeah, it
or
is.
anybody else.
It's yeah.
In what situation where I'm speed running to find out the information in this study that somebody's given me?
It's seeing
No one,
how.
never. When somebody hands me a
No,
thesis, I have days and weeks to study this
no, you
thing to
don't.
find out what statistics they have. Yeah,
No, you don't.
sure.
No, you don't.
What scientist isn't like, well, you have to get this done right now.
Sometimes you do.
The nuclear plant's about to blow up.
But this is
When is this
not about
happening?
that. And you're being absurd to try to prove a point. It's just showing you how much you don't know about it. It's not about that. It's about the education system. It's about how will you do in an education system and how advanced are you really? We know at this point in your educational career, you're supposed to know this much, but we're going to show you stuff you don't know, and we want to see how quickly you can figure it out. That's all it is. Or
Sure.
perhaps you do know it, and if you know it super quickly, we're going to give you more stuff under more time constraints to find out how much stuff you really might know. And the fact that you don't get it is fine, but if you do get it, then that's really good. And that's what we want to find out. That's how they know how advanced you are. Otherwise, they wouldn't know. Say you know everything that you're supposed to know at your grade. Okay, you and everybody else who's supposed to know, except for the people who don't care. But how far along are you? And that's what it's testing. And how smart may you be? And that's also what it's testing. Or if you learn how to game the system, so to speak, and you're one of those outliers, okay, but you're less than a small percentage of people. So it really won't affect our test much, although it might be good for you, but you'll crash and burn later because you don't really understand. You just got lucky and learned how to game the system. But that's on you. That's really all it is. It's not that complicated. And they set it up to do those things.
Yeah, I highly disagree with that.
You don't like it, but you disagree with
Uh,
what they did, but that's what they did.
I don't think it's finding any of that out when the way
Yes.
they're doing that.
Yeah, you know, I could say you don't like it, but that's what they're trying to do. They got to have some way to know, and that's the closest way they can come
They don't
about it.
have to know any of
Because
that
I'll tell you this, the
because none of the
way,
education system makes you do any of that. What is
yeah,
that
well,
going to do for
you don't
anybody?
think that. Well, you haven't been there, so how do you know?
When when
When you
when
went,
has anybody ever been like, well, man, I'm glad I was studied on how to disassociate this information from this information so quickly from my test taking in real life. Oh, wait, never.
Right. Well, it will teach you later on how to do things and how to read quickly when you get a huge volume of information to have to go through and then create a paper on it in a very short span of time and give it to the teacher and let them know what you actually learned.
Sure,
That's what
that's a
it's
method
starting.
of learning. That's not a process of finding out how indicatively intelligent you are.
Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about. You don't know what that is because people who are not that intelligent have an extremely difficult time going through a large pile of information quickly, sifting through it, distilling it to its essence, and speaking on the subject succinctly and clearly in a short amount of time and giving it back to somebody else. If you're not particularly smart, you can't do it.
Sure.
And that's
I
what that is. That is what that is simulating. There is no other way to do that other
poorly,
than in that test, other than that in a
extremely poorly.
in a mass scale. That's the only way it can be done in a mass scale. So that's what it's doing. And that's my point. You have to, somewhere, you have to draw the line. Is it perfect? Nope. But it's as close as they can get with the mass testing they have to do. And that's what we spent the last 15 minutes arguing about, something you didn't understand or didn't like. And I'm telling you,
No,
that's
I
what it's
think it's
doing.
still about the education system, although I think your take on it is much different and you're trying to be very optimistic on the way and means they're going about it.
I, I, I think, I'm
I
sure
think it's
after
very
talking to,
algorithmic and formulaic to them, and they
well,
think that
that again,
they have a perfect presence on how to take a test, and I think it's very flawed, extremely flawed.
everything is algorithmic and formulaic to some degree, especially when you have to do it to the masses. That's just the way life is. It's just the way things have to work. Now, you could have the individual thing like the old Socratic method, where you're teaching these things, but you didn't have schools as such. You had tutors for the rich people, and the poor people just had to get lucky to
Hmm.
have somebody to apprentice with. And that was common for thousands of years. But now there's so much information. There's such a great deal of base information that people have to learn quickly as they're growing up to be able to function and think even remotely generally in a functioning modern society, that you have these schools that you have to attend. Now, originally it was to create the perfect little industrial worker and make them conform. But now I think it's more about making people conform mentally than it is about making them conform in other ways, even to the
Hmm.
education. They want you to think wild as long as you don't actually do anything about it and you accept people in positions of authority telling you what's best for you. That seems to be what they're pushing down people's throats more than anything else right now, which bothers me to some degree. But you do have to have a little of that. But I like to see people thinking more freely, and they are not doing that as much anymore. That is very clear to me.
Well, they only have so much time in a day to get you into the next row of curriculum that they want to get you to. So that's probably
Well, that's
part of the
one way to
problem.
think about it. The other one is it's it's just really strange to me how people will quickly accept stuff. And now you have the knee-jerk reaction from people that won't believe a certain group of people in position of a power because they're always wrong. And now you think anything they say is garbage, which is not true. I try to critically evaluate every fact presented to me as a separate issue, no matter who says it. That's part of that critical thinking and perception
Yeah,
thing. And, somebody you can hate can actually say something that's absolutely true. You
sure.
may not like that they said it, but it's absolutely true. And I'll just deal with it and I'm okay
Mhm.
with it. Now, if I dislike them, I'm more likely to think what they're telling me is not true, but that doesn't make it less a fact. I just
Yeah.
have to reconsider it. And that goes to the other thing. You see a lot more group studies at the university level, high school, and lower level education system, which I do not like. And ostensibly, it's to make people more socially available and cooperative. And all it does is make sure that your little kids who are lazy and not particularly bright pass. And the people who are bright and intelligent and do a lot of work drag those people with them and it loads them down. I don't like that.
Yeah.
I think there's far too
I,
much of it. I've seen too many people who should have failed pass, and they think everything is fine. Why? Because they're too sub-intelligent to know that they don't know what's going on. And they don't have to,
Well, the
because other
problem is
people are always
it's such
pulling
an
them
easy
off.
fix to fix that while still getting the benefits of social interaction because they could just easily give you a contribution,
Well, I
a
had
list
it.
of things you need to contribute to the project,
Right,
but they don't grade you individually. They grade you on the group and how
right,
well the group did. But somebody's going to
right.
compensate for their
Yeah, I
contribution
don't,
or their
you know,
lack
that
thereof,
it,
which is a
it's okay.
problem. They should grade them individually on it.
Right. It's okay to have that sometimes, but not as a major method of education. I despise it. I think it's lazy, and it
Mhm.
also gives false expectations of people. And also, it makes people less self aware, and it makes the people who are actually good people less prone to try and think individually because they're just going to get weighed down by people who can't do anything or won't do anything.
Sure.
And they like, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing all the work anymore because I've been doing it. And a potentially bright student who wanted to do well now is just jaded and sick of it. And I've seen that more than once.
Well, that leaks even into applying to jobs. They'll have personality tests, and if you don't grade well in the personality test, and the personality test is heavily bent towards you being a quote unquote team player, whether or
Right.
not you're going to help people when they need help, whether or not
Well,
you're going to help them despite the
there's
fact that
nothing
you aren't
wrong
done
with
with your
helping
work.
people who need help, but there's another thing with helping somebody who always is that same person who
Right.
won't do what they're supposed to, and they always need help because they won't or can't do what they're supposed to.
Exactly. And there's an issue with that personality test in these situations because it's like you don't understand the context to which I'm answering this question. You don't know. You don't know what past
Right.
experiences I've had and how I'm thinking
Yeah.
about this situation of, well, should I be helping this person or should I just let them finally fall because they never keep up and they never carry their burden?
Yeah. I got to
So,
tell you, unless I would help them until I figured out that they were using me, then I would stop helping them. And I would tell them, look, man, you need to learn this out. I'm going to let you fail a few times. And I haven't abandoned you. I'm going to watch you, but I'm going to let you fail. That's the only way you're going to learn what you need to do. I
right.
tell them straight out. And it's on them if they get angry with me. Because, and that's the other thing. Until you fail, you don't really know what it's like to fail and what you need to do to overcome it. And that's what I mean about now the education system is about to make sure that you don't fail. So you have no idea what it's really like to succeed. You can't fail now almost. You have
Right.
everybody everywhere floating you up. Even when you do nothing, you
You
pass.
got to do is show
Everybody,
up.
yeah, everybody gets a participation
And it's
trophy.
demanded that you show up. So it's not even that hard to show up anymore.
Right. Even if you don't participate,
Yeah.
right? And
Just
again,
attendance.
they would throw the trouble causing kids out of school. They would have to stay home with their parents, and the parents had to deal with them. They don't do that now. They just send them to a different school.
Hmm.
Like, what is that? That's not punishment. Those
Well,
kids don't care.
I think it's also very observant as well and very prominent showing of how people think of the education system now compared to back then is when this whole fiasco of the COVID and everything breaking out and people having to stay at home or people having to go to work and their kid wasn't able to go to school. It became very inconvenient for them. Essentially, a lot of parents see the education system as a
Babysitter.
daycare, as a
Yeah,
daycare
they
center.
have for a very long time.
Right.
Trust me. And you know, and another of the things I saw, most kids when I was going to school, up until high school, when you could get a driver's license as a junior and get a car or whatever, they were taking the bus.
Yeah.
Almost every kid now, some kids still take the bus, but almost every kid now is driven to school, which blows my mind and slows down traffic for miles everywhere. And
Yeah.
it's not necessary. I'm like, and one, how do the parents take the time out of the day to drop their kids off and pick them up every day when the kid also could just ride the bus? Isn't that socializing as well?
It blows my mind. Most of these schools are locally
And they're close.
localized. They're very
Yeah,
close to these
yeah.
neighborhoods. You could walk there. I know a mile sounds like a long way. It is not a long way for a child to
Right.
walk.
But
It really isn't.
nowadays, with hovering parents and a overly protective society, you can't be a kid anymore. You're
Yeah.
basically a toddler until you're 18 years old. It
Hmm.
blows my mind. And they're wondering why the kids can't think for themselves and can't do for themselves, they're treated like toddlers until they're 18 years old now.
Yeah. That
You
was
agree?
very, yeah, that was very prominent when I was going
That's part of that group
to high
work.
school.
That's what little babies do. They hang in groups. That's what little preteen kids do. They hang in groups because they know by themselves they're weak. So they hang in groups, and that's what weak people do. They gang up in groups. And I'm going to tell you, just because everybody says a certain thing is so, doesn't make it so.
Right.
you know, it's a group speak is not doesn't mean a fact is any different.
Right.
And that's what the education system teaches. And I don't like that. It's simply, I think it's twisting people's minds into a way that I don't particularly care for. Back when I was a kid, a thing was a fact and that was it. And no amount of arguing would change it. No amount of different things would change it. Now, you could take it out of context and show how it was a bad thing or do different things and have brainstorming and free thought. But the fact remained in its original intent is what it was. And if 20 people said that that fact was a different thing, didn't make it any different. Those 20 people were just wrong.
Right.
and it's just not that way anymore.
Yeah.
That blows my mind.
I think you're also touched on the inherent problem with majority vote on a lot of situations where if there's a lot of uneducated people, a majority vote can really cause some havoc because they're voting on something they have no idea what they're talking about.
Yes, and that's obviously, well, you can see that in our political system. People vote now on party lines, or they vote for people they think they like instead of looking at the actual issues.
Yeah,
and,
they don't look at
and
any of the
doing
policies.
research on the person.
Yeah.
That person could be garbage,
Mm-hmm.
but you like them because they're nice to you. Oh, or so and so went to school with them, or I met them at a party once, so I'm going to vote for them. But that person could be horrible, or I don't like that person because they have a nasty attitude. That's exactly the kind of person you want in that position, and they're
Right.
knowledgeable and they know what needs to be done. They won't try to kiss everybody's behind to make everything better for everybody. They know this needs to be done, and only an unpleasant person could make it happen, perhaps. So, you need to think a little larger, I think, than just thinking small little boxes or Pollyanna attitudes with certain things, or because, well, yeah, I know that guy. I went to school with him. He's a good guy. You don't know if he's a good guy if you went to school with him. It's 20 years later.
Yeah, I also think it's a bit indicative of the way the method's taught of memorizing and regurgitation because you take a lot of things from a textbook for face value.
Right.
So you're not really researching these people when you see them on the
Right.
TV telling you all these great things, what they're going to do for you, and then you don't look at their history. They've done exactly the opposite they said they were going to do for their
Yes.
entire political career.
Right.
They're not going to do what they say they're going to do.
And they're lying to you again, and they've said different. So if
Yeah.
you see that, don't vote for them.
Mhm.
If their actions don't match their words, don't vote for them. But,
Yeah.
people being people. And the education system should direct this.
Yeah.
We took American civics as I was in the 9th grade. I don't think it's in school anymore. That's
I
another
took
thing.
civics. My civics was mostly on economics, which was still useful, but it didn't really go
No,
into
our American civics was about the American government.
hardly any of my
You
civics
have
was about the
almost
American
nobody
government.
know what the executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branch really is
We
anymore.
had that a
and
little
that's a
bit in
shame.
social studies. I think social studies is kind of
Yeah, but that's at a really
incorporated that into
basic
their
level
system.
if it's social studies, because that's elementary school. I'm talking
Social
high
studies
school.
so sadly social studies is even in high school now. So social
Yeah,
studies is
that
all the
means
way up there.
that means
Social
they've
studies has turned its own genre. There's math, science, English, and social studies is your big four.
yeah, we didn't have social studies
I
anymore
don't know if it's like
after.
that anymore anyway.
Yeah, it was civics, and you were learning about grown people. I learned how to do a 1040 short form in high school. I learned how to do taxes in high school. I know
They
they
don't
don't teach
teach
that. They
any of
teach
that.
a lot more. In general business school class, I had to learn how to balance a checkbook. I bet they don't teach that anymore. That's what I'm saying. No practical stuff, just a lot of abstract BS, which will be totally different in 5 years.
Hmm.
That seems like the only thing left that's still real is math, because numbers are still numbers.
They're
And new
trying to take
math has
that
turned
away.
that on its head, but everybody's
Yeah.
laughing at it. And they're saying, oh, this is why they do it. They want people to think differently. Yeah, there's only so far that can go and still be
Right.
actual math, especially when
I
you get to advanced math.
Now there are some methods of learning math that I am way for than the typical traditional way they teach math, but
Mhm.
it's not the one they're currently using. But
Of course
I
not.
Yeah, there is some I've seen on YouTube and certain like I can't remember the name of it, but
Math
Khan's Academy,
promotes,
K's Academy, some
yeah,
YouTuber. He's a professor and he does have actual like methods of teaching math and
right.
he
Math
goes
promotes
into it.
disciplined thinking and critical analysis, and it
Mhm.
seems like schools want to stay away from that as much as possible, which
I
is
don't know if they want to stay away from it.
amazing to me.
They've definitely found the difficulties of trying to teach that way compared to everything else the way they teach it. So they're trying to
Right.
incorporate the new way, which is not that way.
Right. And as I said, we don't want people thinking for themselves. That's crazy talk. That's
Yeah,
that's what it seems like. But that was not the way when I was a kid, in the
yeah.
70s. That it was just not that way. They wanted to give you as much information as possible back then, and they wanted you to learn it, and they wanted you to know it. They wanted you to succeed in school so you could succeed in life, not so
Mhm.
you could just do what you're told. Doing what you're
Now,
told was a byproduct. Now it seems to be the main thrust of being in school. But I could be wrong about that. I haven't been to school in many, many years. So
mhm.
it just seems like that's what they're promoting.
Yeah. If there's anything to take away from this, and I want to put this, I'm not sure how eloquently I'll be able to word this, but I avidly believe wholeheartedly if there is any politician or any president that's running and they don't talk about revamping the education system for a betterment of society, I don't listen to them because that is probably the first and fundamental issue we have in any nation of the lack of education, and that lack of education causes a whole other plethora of
Yeah,
issues.
I think they simply need to figure out a way to keep people who are obviously disruptive and willful failures and put them in somewhere that's different and stop pulling back the people who want to learn and shine because they're slowing it down for everybody. They're
That's one of
causing
the very
disruptions.
many issues of the
Yeah,
education
and that's
system.
just to begin with. Once you
Yeah.
figure out that, the rest of it becomes very, very easy because then you can have different.
Yeah, the atmosphere completely changes. So then you can
Yes,
start having people willingly wanting to learn, and that changes
yes,
everything so much. I will say that
right.
it's probably one of the bigger issues, but not to me, not the biggest issue. I think the program itself is fundamentally incorrect the way they teach. It's just
Such
poor.
as
It's just bad.
like
Sitting kids into a room and forcing them to learn something they have no interest at all. The way they go about teaching it, keep teaching,
that's
having one teacher teach 30 to 40 children.
that's
There's no
always been the
one-on-one
way.
contact.
Yeah, when
It's
I was going
terrible.
to school, it was the same
It's
way.
awful.
And that's the way you industrialize education to get so many people shoved through
Yeah,
there
it's
with the
awful.
tax dollars. It seems like they would have gotten better with that, but they've gotten worse. Like they've gotten rid of recesses, which is crazy.
Mhm.
That helps kids blow off steam. And you're going to have kids sit still for 9 hours a day.
I
That's
think
nuts.
incorporating technology and how somehow making it very efficient on teaching people on a more of a one-to-one scale, if they can ever incorporate that into their education system, will have leaps and bounds and
Well, I don't
progression
I don't
in
disagree.
teaching
You have a
people.
lot more capability with that, with people sitting in front of the computers and feeling like they're individuals learning. But then how do you get people shoved into groups and dragging along the unwilling and unknowing along
Yeah,
with those who
that's part of the
excel?
problem. You can't do
Yeah,
one without the other for sure.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
Because that's really a goal. I saw it in their curriculum. A goal of there was to drag these people forward, where before
yeah.
they would just fail out or stop showing
Or
up.
they would have to keep repeating the same grade.
Right.
That's
Or
usually
they would stop. Yes, they would start repeating the grade. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. You never know what's going on with them. And they might need to do it. They just couldn't do it because they weren't developed enough or they simply couldn't get it and they had to repeat it. Okay, repeat it. But no, nobody does that anymore.
also
Nobody does.
parents being more involved with
Yeah.
their kids'
And
education.
it would force that too. You,
Yeah,
you, you simply do your role as government and stop being a nanny. And amazingly, things will self correct
yeah,
because it's only made it worse lately. But
yeah. I
what
think
do I
the
know?
culture around parents and being involved in
They've had to
education
dumb
is
down the system
terrible.
to get people through. So that's obviously not working.
Right. So, what do you want to talk about on the next podcast?
I think we will touch on something that's very, very sensitive. And one thing that's bothered me, and we've talked about it before, is how well the justice system treats pedophiles, relatively, relatively speaking. That's what we're going to talk about. Pedophiles in the justice system in the United States and other countries too. We'll get some statistics and facts about how they're done.
Mhm.
But yeah, it they should be treated much more harshly, in my personal opinion. And we'll go about more harshly than what, and we'll talk about that. But tune in for the next one. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed us arguing with each other about these particular things. And it certainly didn't go the way I thought it was, but I thought it was a good one. And I know we missed many, many things because we stuck on a couple of subjects much longer than we could. But
I'm
I
very passionate
enjoyed
about
it.
education system.
Right, or particular things. And I want to thank y'all for listening. And I hope you tune in for next time. Take care. I'm Boomer X.
I'm Millennial Z. Peace.